I cried while going through this experience before putting it out here. There is a problem, and I am sincere about this. This is not me trying to hold you back to watch what is not true. This is not clickbait. This is a veteran splitting a shocking truth that will break many. For some, it is the last revelation they will hear before it happens. I will kindly ask that no matter how busy you are, please watch to the end. Also, tell us where you are watching from, so we can connect as a family, and our prayer team can start praying for you from today. Share this as well with 2 of your family members and friends so they can get ready too. I will begin sharing today's experience. I am not going to spend too much time talking about myself at the beginning of this, because honestly, I do not want to bore you with all of that. But I will say one thing, and I mean it with everything in me. I have served this nation. I gave years of my life to this country. And in those years, I have seen things that most people sitting in their living rooms watching the news will never get to know about. There are things happening behind closed doors, things being done by people in high places, people with power and influence, all in the name of staying relevant and keeping control. And if I were to sit here and begin to pull back that curtain and show you what really goes on, I promise you, people would not just be shocked, they would weep. And I do not mean a few tears. I mean the kind of weeping that comes from somewhere deep inside, the kind that makes your chest hurt. But that is not what today is about. God willing, maybe one day. But not today. What I am sharing today is something different, something that shook me in a way that nothing in all my years of service ever did. And I want you to understand, after I retired, I made up my mind. I said to myself, I am done. I am not going to be in front of people anymore. I am not going to be giving warnings or showing up on anybody's platform or pulling people aside to tell them what is coming. I just wanted to live my quiet life, enjoy the little time I have left, maybe sit on the porch, watch my grandchildren grow, and just be at peace. That was the plan. I did not want any part of public life anymore. I just wanted rest. But something kept pressing on my heart. And when I say pressing, I mean it would not leave me alone. I would wake up in the middle of the night, and it was there. I would be sitting quietly, and it would come again. Jesus kept putting it on my heart to share this, over and over again, and for weeks I resisted because I am an old man, and I just wanted peace. But then the thing happened that I am about to tell you, and after that, I could not hold it in anymore. He made it very clear to me that it is almost too late, that if I do not say something now, then the moment will pass, and the consequences of that silence will fall on people who deserve to be warned. So here I am. Now let me tell you about that Saturday morning in early February. I have had eye trouble for a long time now. It is not something new. Many times it makes things difficult for me, especially when it comes to seeing things from a distance. Because of that, I stopped driving a long time ago. It just was not safe for me to be on the road when I could not properly make out what was far ahead. My grandson usually handles that for me. He takes me where I need to go, picks things up for me, all of that. But that Saturday, he was out. He had somewhere to be, and I did not want to bother him or wait. I needed to get something small from a store nearby, and something in me just said, go. I will be fine. I am only going a short distance. So I got into the car. I was driving, and I thought I was doing all right. The road felt familiar, and I told myself it would just be a few minutes. But here is the thing about eyes that cannot see well. It does not matter how familiar the road is. And as I was moving, there was a vehicle coming from the other direction, and I could not get a proper view of it in time. The other driver saw what was happening and hit the brakes hard. But by that point, we were already too close. The cars made contact. It was not a massive crash, not the kind you see in movies, but my body is not what it used to be. I am old. My body is already fragile in ways that I have come to accept over the years, and that small amount of force, that little hit that someone younger probably would have walked away from without even a bruise, it did something to my heart. Right there at the scene of the accident, I passed out. And that is when everything began. I do not know how to explain what happened next in a way that will make complete sense to someone who has never experienced anything like this, but I will try my best to put it into words, because what I saw, I cannot carry alone anymore. The first thing I became aware of was that I was somewhere. I was standing, or at least it felt like I was standing, but I was not on any road that I recognized. I was not in pain. I did not feel the confusion you would expect after an accident. I just found myself in this place, and the air around me felt different from any air I had ever breathed before. Heavy, but not in a bad way. More like full, like there was something in it. And then I looked down. There on the ground in front of me, among what I can only describe as debris, like things broken and scattered and pushed aside, there were maps. Not just one map. I could see about 8 different nations represented there in the middle of all that mess on the ground. I recognized some of them by their shapes. I could make out what looked like the shape of Brazil, and I could see what appeared to be something that looked like the map of Nigeria. And there was another one that had the outline of what looked like India, and beside that one there was what had to be the United Kingdom. They were all just lying there, scattered among broken things, as though they had been thrown down and forgotten. And there were others too, 4 more at least that I noticed, but that I cannot fully account for right now, because what happened next pulled all of my attention away from counting. My eyes kept going back to one of them, the map of America. I do not know why. I honestly cannot tell you what made me bend down and reach for it instead of any of the others. I was not thinking about it. My hand just went there, and I picked it up. The moment it was in my hands, I felt something shift. It is hard to explain. It was like the ground beneath me was no longer just ground, like reality itself had decided to do something it had never done before. And before I could even think about what was happening, it felt like I was being pulled in. Not violently, not with fear, but pulled in the way you would go into sleep, smooth and certain, and before you know it, you are already there. I was inside the map, and when I say inside, I mean I was looking at America the way you would look at something if you were floating just above it. But close enough to see the streets and the neighborhoods and the houses. It was like the sharpest picture you have ever seen in your life. Clearer than anything I have ever seen with my own 2 eyes, even back when my eyes were good. Everything was visible, and it did not look like a map anymore. It looked like the real thing. But something was happening that immediately made my chest tighten. There were what I can only describe as flames, but not the flames of a physical fire. These were not burning buildings or cars. It was more like a spiritual kind of flame, like something was igniting in places, little bursts of something that looked like fire, but felt like activity. Like things were being set in motion, and the moment I tried to understand what I was looking at, the scene shifted, and I realized that what I was seeing was playing out like a video game. That is the only way I know how to put it, and in this scene I could see figures moving, dark figures, and they were marching, moving in a deliberate way, like soldiers who had a plan and knew exactly where they were going. They were going to homes. Every single one of them had a destination, and they were moving through neighborhoods, through streets, and what they were looking for was open doors and open windows, and wherever they found one, wherever a home had something open, they went in. No hesitation, no pause. They just moved right through, and the moment they entered a home, the light in that home went off. Just like that. One moment there was light, and then they walked in, and it went dark. And this was happening over and over and over again. Home after home after home. They would find an opening. They would go in, and the light would die. And it was not just in one neighborhood or one city. I was seeing it happening across the whole nation, across different kinds of homes, big ones and small ones, houses and quiet streets and apartments in busy cities. It did not matter. If there was an opening, they went in and the light followed. But what started to truly disturb me was what I began to hear and see once the lights went off in these homes. In some of them, after the darkness came, there would be a shout, not a regular kind of yell. A shout that was so loud it felt like it should have shaken the walls, like it was coming from somewhere deep inside whoever was making it. And then silence. Just like that, the shout would stop and everything would go quiet again. And when I looked carefully at those homes, I could still see people inside them. They were moving around in their rooms, going about things, looking like people who were just living their normal lives. But something was different now. Something had changed the moment that shout happened. I kept watching because I wanted to understand what the shout was about. Was someone hurt? Was someone in danger? But they were still there, still moving, still existing. No one had been physically hurt as far as I could see, and that was what troubled me most, because the shout was real. It came from somewhere real. But whatever it was not about a physical wound. It was not the shout of someone whose body had been hurt. It was something else, and I stood there trying to put my hand on it, trying to name what I was feeling about those homes, but I could not. At that moment, whatever the shout truly represented, it was just out of my reach. I knew it was important. I knew it was connected to everything else I was seeing, but I could not name it yet. And then something else caught my attention. I noticed a group, not the dark figures that had been marching into homes. This was something completely different. There were about 9 of them, and everything about them was different from what I had been watching before. The best way I can describe how they looked is to say that they were wearing what appeared to be armor. Not the kind of armor you would see in a history book or a museum. This was different. It was like armor, but it carried something with it, some kind of weight and importance that made you know immediately that these were not regular beings. 9 of them, and they were standing in a circle. What made me focus on them was the way they were positioned. They were not standing the way people stand when they are just gathered together for no reason. They were standing with purpose, and the way they were grouped, the way their circle was formed, it was clear that there was someone in the middle of them. Whoever was in the center of that circle, these 9 were surrounding that person deliberately, like they were covering someone. Like whatever or whoever was in the middle of that circle was the most important thing in that entire scene. I was looking at that circle, trying to see who was in the center, and then something happened. They parted. Not all of them at once, but they moved, and as they did, the center of the circle became visible. And the moment I saw who was standing there, I did not need anyone to tell me. I did not need a voice to say a name. I did not need a sign or any kind of announcement. I just knew. The way you know certain things in your deepest self without having to think about it. It was Jesus. He began to walk toward me, and as he walked toward me, everything else I had been watching, the dark figures, the homes going dark, the shouts, the maps, all of it seemed to pull back to the edges, because what was coming toward me was something my entire body was not built to contain. I felt it before he even reached me. Love. But not love the way we use that word in regular conversation. Not the kind of love that makes you smile or feel warm. This was love the way a flood is a flood. It was coming at me in waves, and each wave was bigger than the last, and the closer he came, the more I felt like I was just dissolving, like whatever I was made of was not enough to hold all of what he was bringing toward me. I felt compassion from him in a way I cannot put into words. I have seen hard things in my life. I have been through things that took years off me. But in that moment, all of it, every hard year, every difficult thing, every wound I had ever carried, all of it was visible to the compassion that was coming from him, and it did not make me feel exposed. It made me feel seen, like he knew every single part of it and loved me anyway, completely, without condition, without hesitation. By the time he was fully close to me, my body or whatever I was in that place could barely take it anymore. I felt like I was going to completely come apart just from the nearness of him. That is the only way I know how to say it. Whatever I had in me, it was not enough to hold the fullness of what he was carrying. And then he did something. He reached, and he took out what looked like a scroll. But when I looked at it closely, I recognized it. It was the same kind of thing as the American map that I had picked up from among the debris back there where all this started. The same kind of map, but he was holding it, and he was turning it toward me in a way that made it clear he wanted to show me something on it. He wanted me to see what was there, and as he held it close so I could look, everything I had been watching before, the whole scene I had been witnessing, began to come back into view. But this time I was not watching it from a confused place. This time, with him standing next to me and the scroll open between us, I began to understand what I was seeing. All of it started to make sense in a way it had not before. And then Jesus spoke to me. He said to me, "What you have been watching is not something from another time. It is not a story from the past, and it is not a picture of something that will happen after many years. What you are seeing right now is what is happening in the spirit. This is a spiritual dimension that sits right alongside everything you live in every day. The homes you saw, the lights going off, the dark figures walking through open doors and windows, all of it is real. It is happening right now in the unseen world. And what happens in that world always shows up in the visible world eventually. What you are watching is being set in motion for this very season, for these very days. I want you to understand how that landed on me. I have spent years in environments where information was treated with a certain kind of seriousness, where a briefing meant something, where what you were told had weight because lives depended on understanding it correctly. And when Jesus said those words to me, something in me that was trained over many years to recognize when something is urgent, that part of me stood at attention. Because this was not general, this was specific, this was now. He then began to explain to me what the shouts I had heard in those homes were about, and this is the part that made me understand why I could not identify it on my own. He told me the shout I heard after the lights went off was not the shout of someone dying. It was the shout of something leaving, something being taken. At the moment the dark figures entered those homes and the light went off, something real was being removed from the person inside, not their physical life, but something just as real, maybe even more real in the long run. Something that God had placed inside them for a purpose, and the shout was the soul's response to that loss, even if the person themselves did not fully understand in that moment what had just been taken from them. It was the sound of a person losing something precious without even knowing the full weight of what was gone. And he said that was one of the most heartbreaking parts of this whole thing, that so many people who have experienced this theft do not even know they have been robbed. They feel the effects. They feel something is different. They feel like something is missing, but they cannot put a name on it. They go about their days carrying this emptiness that should not be there. And they look for reasons. They come up with explanations, but they never look in the direction of what is actually causing it. He told me the reason the people in those homes were still moving around, still appearing to function, was because this is not a visible kind of damage. It does not show on the outside the way a broken arm shows on the outside. A person can lose something significant in the spirit and still get up the next morning and go to work and smile at people and appear completely fine. But inside, in the part of them that was built to carry God's purposes, something has been reduced, something has been drained. And over time, as it keeps happening, the reduction becomes more and more noticeable in the outcomes of their life, in their relationships, in their finances, in their connection to God, even if they still cannot trace it back to the source. This, he told me, was the plan, not to destroy people in one loud, dramatic moment, but to quietly reduce them over time, through a habit that most people are too ashamed to talk about openly and too comfortable with, to truly fight. Then Jesus told me about the timing of what was coming, and this part of what he said is what I feel the most responsibility to make sure people hear clearly. He said the forces behind this had already begun their preparation, that by the end of February the groundwork would already be laid. Things would already be in motion. The spirit of masturbation was going to be released in a way that was broader and more aggressive than anything most people had seen in their lifetime, and the release was not going to be slow or subtle in its reach. It was going to be wide. He said the preparation phase at the end of February was just the setup. The real weight of the attack, the full force of what was being sent, was going to come in starting in March and run through the middle of April. That was the window. That was when the pressure would be the heaviest, and when the greatest number of people would be pulled in if they were not already standing guard. He was very deliberate when he told me this was not something aimed at one type of person. I want to make sure I repeat this clearly because I think people sometimes assume that warnings like this are for a particular group. They think, well, that is for the young people, or that is for men, or that is for people who are not serious about their faith. Jesus made it plain to me that this attack was designed with no exceptions. No gender was left out. No age group was left out. No level of spiritual maturity was considered too high to be targeted. He said the enemy was coming with this in a way that was meant to reach every sector, every household, every kind of person. with no mercy in the design. And the reason he said this to me so plainly was because he wanted me to understand that the people who think they are too old for this kind of temptation, or too serious in their walk with God, or too experienced to be caught by something like this, those are often the very people who get hit the hardest, because they are not watching for it. Their guard is down in this particular area, because they have convinced themselves it is not their battle. But Jesus said to me, the enemy does not care what you think your battle is. He goes where he can find an opening. And pride about your own spiritual level is one of the biggest openings there is. He then told me the reason this particular season was being chosen for this particular attack. And this is where what he said moved from being serious to being something I can only describe as a matter of life and death for the church in this nation. He told me that God had been doing something in the hearts of people across America, something deliberate and intentional. He had been increasing desire, not just a general feeling of wanting more from God, but a specific, deep, holy hunger that had been building and growing in many people over recent months. And he said this hunger was not random. God does not do things randomly. This hunger was preparation. It was God getting people ready for something, building up the kind of thirst in people that would make them positioned to receive what he was about to pour out. He told me that a mighty move of God was being prepared to land on this nation. And when he said mighty, he meant it in a way that left no room for small thinking. He was not talking about a nice local revival that would bless a few hundred people and be over in a week. He was talking about something that would carry real weight across this country and would send a spark that would travel beyond the borders of America and touch nations across the world. A move that would shift things. A move that would cause people to turn back to God in numbers that would make the news. A move that would produce healings and transformations and a kind of spiritual hunger across the entire globe that had not been seen in a very long time, and the enemy had seen it coming. Jesus told me the devil had not missed what God was building. He had watched it. He had monitored the increasing desire in people's hearts. He had seen the hunger growing, and he had made a decision. He was not going to wait for the move of God to land and then try to fight it after the fact. He was going to try to stop it before it could land. He was going to go in early and undermine the vessels through which God intended to pour this out. He was going to target the hunger itself and try to redirect it before it could be used the way God intended. And the weapon he chose was the spirit of masturbation. Jesus explained to me why this weapon specifically. He said the enemy is not random in the weapons he chooses. He picks tools that are effective, tools that work quietly, tools that hit something important without making the kind of noise that would cause people to immediately recognize they were under attack. And masturbation as a weapon hits something very specific and very important. It hits the place where a person's spiritual sensitivity lives. It hits the part of them that is meant to be tuned to the voice of God and to the leading of the Holy Spirit. And when that part is repeatedly compromised, the person begins to function below their level. They begin to operate at a reduced capacity without understanding why. He told me that many of the people who were meant to be the carriers of this coming revival were exactly the people the enemy was now targeting. The ones in whom God had been building that hunger. The ones who had been sensing something coming, something big, something they could not quite put into words, but that they had been feeling in prayer. Those people. The enemy had them in his sights specifically because he understood what their role was supposed to be in what God was preparing to do. And then Jesus said something that I did not expect. He told me that the older believers, the more senior members of the body of Christ, were just as much in the target as the younger ones. I think I expected him to say the young people were the main target. And yes, he confirmed that the younger generation was very much in the path of this attack. But he said the senior believers, the ones who had walked with God for decades, the ones whose prayers had been carrying weight in the Spirit for years, those people were also being targeted because the devil understood something that many in the church have not fully recognized. He said God does not discard people because of age. God does not stop being able to use a person just because they have gotten older. Some of the most powerful vessels God has ever worked through have been people who had lived long enough to know how to truly yield, truly surrender, truly trust. And the enemy knew this. He knew that God intended to use the older generation in this coming move, not just as observers or supporters, but as active carriers, as people whose years of walking with God had produced something in them that was exactly what this revival needed: their experience in prayer, their history with God, their understanding of how he works. These were going to be essential in what was coming, and so the devil could not afford to leave them alone. He had to go after them too. He had to find a way to pull even the older ones into this. And so the attack was designed to cover everyone, every age, every level, every sector. No one was being given a pass. Jesus then showed me how the strategy was going to be carried out. And I want to say again, the simplicity of it is what hit me the hardest. Because when something is simple, it is hard to argue against. You cannot call it far-fetched. You cannot dismiss it as too elaborate to be real. It was simple in the way that the most effective traps are always simple. The first part of the strategy was about phones. He told me that the price of phones was going to be pushed down. Already, phones have become something that almost everyone has, but the plan was to make them even more accessible, even cheaper, available to a level of the population that previously could not easily afford them. And the reason this mattered in the context of what was coming is because the phone is the single most common doorway through which sexual content enters a person's life today. It is right there, always in the hand, always on the nightstand, always within reach at the most vulnerable hours of the night when a person cannot sleep and has a moment of weakness. If more people have phones, more people have a doorway sitting in their pocket at all times. And the enemy understood this and was working to make sure that doorway was as widely available as possible. The second part of the strategy was about internet speed. He told me that internet speed was going to increase. Already the speed is fast, but the plan was to make it faster. And this matters because speed removes resistance. When something is slow, when you have to wait, when there is a buffer or a delay, that time can be the moment when a person thinks twice. That moment of waiting can be the moment when a person stops and makes a different choice. But when everything is instant, when what you are looking for appears before you even finish reaching for it, the moment of temptation and the moment of giving in collapse into one. There is no space in between for reconsideration. And that is exactly what the enemy wanted. Remove the waiting. Remove the pause. Make it instant, and the resistance that might have been there disappears. The third part of the strategy was what Jesus described as an unusual sexual desire that would come upon people. And this is the one that concerned me the most because it was the most invisible of the three. Cheap phones and fast internet are things you can point to. You can see them. You can make a choice about them. But an unusual desire that comes upon you from the outside while feeling like it came from the inside, that is something else entirely. He told me that part of what those dark figures were doing as they moved through the homes was planting this desire. When they entered a home through an open door or an open window, one of the things they were doing was turning up a kind of craving in the person that was not natural to that person. It was not coming from within them in the way normal human desire comes. It was being introduced from outside, and then taking root and presenting itself as something internal. And so the person would feel this heightened desire and would think it was just them, just their body, just a normal human experience, when in reality they were feeling the effect of something that had been deliberately placed. And the people who had been carrying that holy hunger that God had been building, the one God was using to prepare people for the coming move. Those people were especially vulnerable to this specific part of the attack, because hunger can be redirected. A person who is deeply hungry for God but who has not yet learned to fully feed that hunger in the right direction can sometimes find that hunger being pulled toward the wrong thing, not because they are weak or spiritually immature, but because the enemy is skilled at redirection, at taking something that was pointed toward God and slowly, subtly tilting it toward something else until the person is not even sure anymore what they are hungry for. Jesus then stopped, and he looked at me in a way that I can only describe as the kind of look that goes all the way through you. And he said, I need you to understand what is being stolen, because people need to know what they are losing when they go back to this. It is not just a moral failure. It is not just something to feel bad about and move on from. Something real is being taken, and until people understand what is being taken from them, they will not fight for it the way they need to fight. And then he showed me the three specific things that the enemy steals from a person through masturbation. And he did not just name them. He showed me how they work, what they look like when they are being drained out of a person, and what the effect of their absence looks like in a person's life over time. The first thing he showed me was a person's ability to hear God clearly. Their spiritual sensitivity, their connection to the voice of the Holy Spirit. He said this was one of the primary targets, because it is one of the most important things a person can have. A person who can hear God clearly is a person who has access to direction that no amount of education or experience can replace. They know when to move and when to stay. They know which door to walk through and which one to leave closed. They know what God is saying about their life, their family, their calling. That clarity is worth more than most people realize until it is gone. And he showed me what it looks like when it begins to be taken. It does not happen all at once. It starts slowly. Prayer begins to feel a little flat, like the connection is still there, but something is muffled. Reading the Word feels routine instead of alive. The sense of God's nearness that the person used to carry, it starts to feel more distant. Not completely gone, but not what it was. And the person notices. They feel it, but they often cannot identify why things have changed, because the secret sin is in one place and the spiritual sensitivity is in another place, and they have not connected the two. Over time, without that clarity, the person begins to make decisions without the guidance they were meant to have. Not big, dramatic decisions always. Sometimes it is the small ones, the daily choices that slowly add up and take a person in a direction that was not the one God intended for them, and the promises that God had spoken over their life, things he had said about their future, things he had called them to do and to become. Those promises begin to sit in a kind of delay, not because God withdrew them, but because the person is no longer clearly hearing the instructions for how to walk toward them. They are waiting for things to happen without hearing the specific steps they were supposed to take. And so they wait, and wait, and the years pass, and the promises feel further away instead of closer, and the person does not know why. He told me this is one of the most painful effects of this attack, for believers in particular, because a believer knows God has spoken. A believer carries the weight of what was promised, and when those things are not manifesting, when time keeps passing and the word of the Lord over their life seems to be sitting still, the discouragement that brings is deep. People lose hope. People begin to question whether God really said what they thought he said. People begin to shrink back from the boldness they once carried, all because the spiritual clarity that was supposed to guide them through the process was quietly being drained out while they were not looking. The second thing he showed me was what I can only call a person's spiritual fire. The thing that drives them. The burning inside that makes a person get up early to pray when they do not have to. That makes a person hunger after the things of God in a way that cannot be explained by routine or religion. That makes a person feel alive in worship, alive in intercession, alive in the pursuit of what God has called them to. That fire is not something small. It is the engine of a person's spiritual life. Without it, everything becomes effort. Everything becomes maintenance instead of pursuit. Jesus showed me this being drained in a specific way. He showed me a person who had that fire, who had carried that burning for years, and then he showed me what happens over time as masturbation repeatedly visits their life. Each time it happens, each time they go back to it, they come away a little more depleted. And they feel it. The guilt is part of what they feel, yes. But underneath the guilt is something else, a kind of tiredness, a weight that sits on them spiritually. And the fire, instead of burning brighter, starts to burn lower, and then lower still, until what was once a roaring hunger for God has become a flicker that the person is working hard just to keep lit. And this matters enormously for what God was preparing to do in this season, because what Jesus had described to me, this coming move of God, this revival that was on the horizon, it could not land on cold ground. A move of that size, a fire of that intensity, requires vessels that are already warm, people who are already burning, people whose hunger has been built up to the point where they are ready to receive something of that magnitude. And if the enemy could come in now, in this preparation season, and take that fire down before the move arrived, then when the move came, there would not be enough burning vessels to hold it. It would have nowhere to land. And the greatest harvest this nation has seen in a generation would be reduced to something much smaller than it was meant to be. He told me that this was the enemy's calculation, that he did not need to stop the move of God entirely. He just needed to reduce the number of burning vessels available to carry it. and masturbation was his most effective tool for doing exactly that, because it hits the fire directly, quietly, and over time. The third thing he showed me was the hardest one for me to sit with. He called it a person's productive capacity, the ability to bring forth what God placed inside them into the world, the ability to produce, to build, to leave something behind that was not there before they came. Every person was designed to produce something, to carry something that was placed in them by God and release it into the world in the form of their work, their family, their ministry, their relationships, their contribution to whatever God placed them in. That capacity to produce is not small. It is one of the central things a person is here for, and he showed me how masturbation drains it, slowly at first and then more noticeably over time. The ability to produce begins to weaken. The person still has desires. They still have ideas. They'll feel in moments like they could do more, but there is a gap between what they feel like they carry and what is actually coming out of them. The output does not match the internal sense of what was placed there, and that gap, that distance between potential and production, grows wider the longer this habit continues unchecked. And the effect on the promises of God is direct, because most of what God promises involves a person doing something, not passively receiving something while they sit still, but actively walking something out, building something, pursuing something, producing something. And when the productive capacity has been drained, even the willingness to take the steps toward the promise becomes weak. The person knows what was said. They have not forgotten, but something in them keeps them from pressing forward the way the promise requires. They start things and do not finish. They hear instructions and do not act on them. They feel called but do not move. And the promise stays on the horizon, always visible, never reached. Jesus then turned and showed me the body of Christ specifically, the church. And what he showed me there made me weep in a way I had not wept since I was a much younger man, facing things I did not think I would survive. Because what he showed me was the church being hit by this attack from the inside, not just from outside the church, not just in the lives of people who do not know God, but inside the walls, inside the families, inside the leadership, inside the places that were supposed to be the safest from this kind of thing. He showed me 3 specific ways the church was going to be affected. The first was through leadership. He showed me people who were standing in positions of responsibility in the church, pastors and leaders and people who carried significant influence over others. And he showed me the same attack hitting them, and the weight of it hitting leadership was different from it hitting anyone else, because everything that flows from a leader touches the people they lead. A leader who is carrying this secret thing, who is standing at the front of a congregation while this hidden drain is happening, is a leader whose words carry less than they should, whose prayers have less force than they were meant to have, whose ability to truly impart something to the people they serve is reduced, not eliminated entirely, but reduced. And the people in those congregations feel the reduction. They do not always know why things feel a certain way, why services feel like they are missing something, why the preaching is technically correct, but not landing with power. But the effect is real. It travels down from the leader to the people. And a congregation that is being led by someone weakened in this way is a congregation that is less prepared to receive the coming move than it would otherwise be. The second way that church was going to be hit was through the unity and connection within the body. Jesus showed me that when people are carrying shame from secret sin, they withdraw. They stop being truly present even when they show up physically. They put on a face that says everything is fine, while inside they are carrying something heavy that they are not bringing to anyone. And a church full of people who are individually isolated by shame, who are going through the motions while keeping their real struggle hidden, is not a church that can do the kind of deep corporate prayer that a revival requires. Because that kind of prayer requires people to be truly connected to each other, truly honest, truly willing to be seen. And shame locks people behind a wall that makes that kind of honesty feel impossible. He told me that one of the most important things the enemy wants to destroy through this attack is the authentic connection within the body of Christ. Because a connected body is a dangerous body, a body of believers who are truly with each other, truly praying together, truly carrying each other's weight. That body can move mountains, but a body full of individuals, each carrying a private shame they cannot share, that body is fragmented. and a fragmented church cannot hold a revival. It would be like trying to catch water in a net. The third thing he showed me about the church was the young people specifically. He said they were going to be the most visible casualties of this attack within the church because they were the most exposed and the least guarded. Not because they were less serious about God, but because the environment they live in, the digital world that is woven through every part of their daily lives, was being used against them in a way that previous generations simply did not face at the same level. And the damage being done to the young people in the church right now was damage that would not fully show its consequences for years to come. But when it did show, the church would find itself trying to move forward with a generation that had been hit at the root during their most formative years. A generation that had spent their teenage and young adult years with this thing, slowly draining the spiritual clarity and fire and productive capacity that they were going to need to carry the kingdom forward. He said this was why the timing of the attack was so deliberate. Because the enemy was not just thinking about what he could accomplish right now. He was thinking generationally. He was thinking about what the church would look like 10 and 15 years from now, if he could hit the young people hard enough in this season. And what he saw when he looked at that future was a church that was present in number but weakened in power. And a weakened church in the future was something he was willing to invest heavily in creating right now. I was weeping as he showed me all of this. I want to be honest with you about that because I think it matters. I am not a man who has made a habit of crying. The things I saw in my years of service, the things I went through, those things required me to keep a certain kind of composure. I learned early how to hold things inside because the work demanded it. But standing there with Jesus showing me what was being done to my nation, to the church I love, to the people who were supposed to be positioned for the greatest move of God that this generation had ever seen, and watching the enemy work methodically to dismantle all of it through one hidden, quiet, shame-covered habit, I could not hold it. I wept, and Jesus let me weep. He did not rush me. He did not move on while I was still processing what I had just seen. He just stood there and let the weight of it land on me the way it needed to land. Because I think he knew that what I was feeling in that moment was part of what was going to make me willing to come back and say this publicly. An old man who just wanted rest, who had no desire to stand in front of anyone ever again, was going to need to feel exactly this much before he would choose to open his mouth. And then he spoke one last time. And it was not a long speech. It was not a list of instructions or a set of detailed steps. It was simple. The way the most important things are always simple when they finally get said. He said, tell them what you have seen, tell them what is coming, and tell them that they still have time to stand. The attack is real and the timing is now. But I am still the one who restores. I am still the one who can give back what has been taken. Tell them to come back to me. Tell them to close the open doors. Tell them to guard what I placed in them, and tell them that the move is still coming. I have not changed my mind. But who will be ready when it arrives depends on what they decide to do right now. And then I was back. I came back into my body the way you come back from something that was so complete and so different from ordinary life that the ordinary feels strange by comparison. There were voices around me, people moving, someone was over me. I could hear the sounds of the street and the sounds of people who had come to help. And I was on the ground at the scene of the accident, where all of this had started with a simple decision to drive to the store. I lay there for a moment before I could speak. Not because I was in great physical pain, though my body was not happy with me, but because I was trying to hold on to every single thing I had just seen. Trying to make sure it stayed with me and did not fade the way dreams sometimes fade when the morning comes, but it did not fade. Every bit of it stayed exactly as clear as it was when I was there. And I knew from that moment that it was not going to leave me, that it was placed in me to stay, and that I was going to have to do something with it. So here I am, an old man who made a simple and unwise decision to drive with eyes that were not up to the task, and who ended up lying on the ground at an accident scene, having seen something that I believe, with everything in me, was real and was meant to be shared. I have told you all of it, every part of what Jesus showed me that day. The maps and the debris, the dark figures in the open doors, the lights going off, the shouts that followed, the 9 in their circle and the one they were covering, the scroll that looked like the map that brought me there, the explanation of what was being stolen and from whom, and why this season was chosen for this particular assault. All of it. If you are reading this and something in you is recognizing itself and what I have described, I want you to hear me say this plainly. I am not here to make you feel worse than you already feel. Guilt and shame have never been the point. The point is that something real is at stake, something that was placed inside you for a purpose that goes beyond you. And the enemy knows what it is, even if you have not fully discovered it yet. And he is working right now in this season to make sure it never fully comes out of you the way God intended. But Jesus told me the move is still coming. He has not changed his mind. The revival is still on the horizon. The question is only, who will be ready when it arrives? And that is still being decided right now, in this season. In the decisions that people make in these weeks between February and the middle of April. That is what I saw. That is what I was sent back to say. And I have said it.